Commissioner Batchel. We are live. Hot seat is yours, Jim.
Oh, thanks a lot. I'll take it. I'm just gonna plug in if you don't mind. Abigail's gonna be on the screen clicking through for me. Thanks for having me back. I'm Jason Batchelder, Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm thankful for that. Thank you. And I am joined by my executive assistant, Abigail Connolly, who's gonna click through. Hopefully it'll be seamless. Hasn't been every time we've tried. But I'm here to talk about an effort that has been maybe a 30-year brainchild. And I'm the lucky commissioner that gets to roll it out. And I mostly mean that. It's a year when the governor took a shining to it, and at a time when there's no doubt we have need, as you saw in our budget proposal, that things are tight. But this is less about making any type of profit than I've sort of been calling it a fairness exercise. And I'll get into why that is, but I'm excited to talk about it. Please reserve the right to be prickly. I know this doesn't fall well with a lot of people, so I'm good for it. And I've heard a lot of angles, and I won't take offense. Slide 2, please, Abigail. This is an infrastructure need. We have a tremendous amount of lands and infrastructure, 205 fishing access areas, 102 WMAs, 5 fish culture stations, 2 conservation camps, and 2 shooting ranges. The shooting ranges you currently need a license for, but some of these other places, and we're not proposing fees for all of these. This has been pared down to an access area effort at the moment. We were pursuing wildlife management areas, so lands also, but that proved a bit confusing for everyone to discern between state parks and fish and wildlife lands, and rightfully so. We didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming, and we've stepped back from lands at the moment. We hope to embark on an intense education outreach effort over the next 6 months to a year and push lands a little bit. But at the moment, this is fish and wildlife access areas. Slide 3, please, Abigail. So we manage these areas that provide access to 132 unique public waters for recreational boating, fishing, hunting, trapping, and wildlife watching. And once people get on the water, they can do whatever they want, right? These are the approved uses that we allow for our fishing access areas. We provide concrete or gravel boat ramps, courtesy docks, 21 universally accessible shore fishing platforms. Paddlecraft can be used at all these sites, and over 36% are designated as universally accessible. And that by the end of 2028, 50% will be fully accessible. And one of the rubs with these places is parking, and that sometimes is what comes to a head. Not always, but parking can be at a premium at some of these. Not all. Next slide, please. So here's the why. These are our user-funded areas that are paid for through motorboat registrations, Dingell-Johnson excise taxes, and about $100,000 a year in capital funds for ongoing maintenance. As the public has become more diverse in their outdoor recreational activities, placing pressure on the department, lands, and its infrastructure, we've recognized the need for something like this. Some of you may have seen an earlier rendition of the slideshow, and I had ice skating in there, which is not an approved use. In case that got back to you, I pulled that out. But essentially, anglers and motorboat users and some hunters have been paying for these access areas. As long as I can tell you, these access areas have been in existence, as long as the Dingell Johnson Fund has been in existence. And I wish I'd prepared to tell you when that was, but decades and decades. Paddlers without a fishing or hunting license or a trapping license, sailors, bird watchers, have been, and we welcome them, have been among the priority uses, and they haven't had to pay. Motorboat users without a fishing license or a hunting license or a trapping license are paying into this system, but a paddler who does not otherwise purchase a department issued license would not be paying into this system. And that cues the fairness piece that I kind of led with. I don't look at this as, we don't, obviously we welcome people there now. We don't look at this as we don't want you here. We obviously want everyone to use our access areas for an approved use. We feel that it is time for more payers. Next slide, please, Abigail. As I talked a little bit about this morning, or maybe alluded to, we have tremendous financial burden in this post-COVID world, managing land, and the current funding model is stressed. We don't shy away from that. Hunters and anglers, trappers provide funding for land management activities historically. And as you have seen, we do not have the demographic that we had in the 70s, 80s to support that any longer. While our participation remains very steady, very high, I think I have said, and it's worth repeating, since 2019, we're at approximately 20% of newborns in Vermont receiving a lifetime hunting and fishing or one of the other license. So some of you may have purchased one for kids in your life. I purchased them for my kids. So let's say you buy a fishing license for a child. They're not entering into the system like they normally would be, right? It's great for us. We do accrue some interest and are able to capture what we find is the meaningful participation out of that person, but they're not paying as they normally would. We do get those first few years, which they wouldn't normally have to pay for, but once they turn 15 and beyond, they don't have to purchase. And so that hits us. And so we're looking for other user payers. Not to make a profit as it states, but asking those who benefit from these areas to help invest. And all this money isn't going to turn around and go back to that particular access area or even access areas in general, but to our general administration. And therefore, some of it will return to these access areas. But it's a general pot. This is going to go into our Fish and Wildlife Fund. Next slide, please. These new licenses will be required by all visitors to fishing access areas who do not currently possess a license that we provide. So a hunting, fishing, trapping license, you'd be exempt. If you had a motorboat registration, you would be exempt. So even if you had a small motor on your boat, your registration fee pays enough into the system where we'll exempt you for that. Yes, please.
Would you be exempt for if you were using like a sailboat, or would you be exempt from using any of those activities?
So if you had a big sailboat with a motor on it, or just a
dinghy,
you would not be exempted from that. Just a dinghy, you would if you did not have another license provided by the department.
So you need two licenses, one for like a little 18-foot fishing boat. You have to register.
So if you had a boat registration on a fishing boat, you would not need this license.
But how do you?
If you just had a sailboat with no motor on it, no motor driven conveyance on that boat, we would ask you to buy this license. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. No,
Cut you off.
okay. I was interrupting.
I
I just have one more question. So how do you enforce this?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and
Probably comes up later on.
I'm not sure it does. I'll cover it now because it's worth touching on a couple different times. So I'm committed to a passive rollout of this, being in the warden service and realizing what it can be like to be enforced against. We don't want this to be a big scary effort where people are fearing going to the water. we would like to handle this through QR code voluntary for the first couple of years, right? Our access areas will be retrofitted to say fee use area with a QR code where folks can scan and download a license on the spot. And we're just going to require it on a phone. There's not going to be a sticker or a decal. And so it would transfer from boat to boat if you needed it, or kayak to kayak in this instance. But let's say you're out on the water, you see a warden, you're the only person there and your car is in the access area. The warden would say, may I see your life jacket? And may I see your access area license, right? So that is how we will roll this out. Warnings for the first couple of years, if probably verbal. We'd much rather sell you one of these licenses than write you a ticket. The tickets go to the general fund. These licenses go to us. And so it's been like that with our fishing license, Fish and Wildlife license fees for a long time. Fines, not fees, Fish and Wildlife fines. If we write you a ticket for fishing without a license, that money goes to the general fund, and some of it goes to Veterans Affairs, which you likely know. But we'd rather have that $20 instead of the general fund getting the 147 because it's a direct impact, and we can match that those license funds up to 3 times. And so we'd much rather have the license than have the ticket. So if that helps, I know that's been a worry for some that we would have a heavy hand in rolling this out, and I'm committed to not doing that. I don't want to be a deterrent to tourism, to anyone coming to Vermont. But it would apply to non-residents as well. And obviously there's a worry from the warden service as well. We talked about capacity this morning. And I don't want to put another bucket of work into the warden services lap, right? I want this to be passive. If they're checking life jackets and they're checking fishing licenses, it wouldn't be a big lift to ask for if they had a fishing license, they wouldn't need one. But if they were checking life jackets, they would ask for this as well. Yeah.
Just for clarification, I think to help out with what Representative Austin is asking, if I own 2 boats, I own a larger boat that has a registration, or some sort of a paddle boat or a small sailboat doesn't require a registration. Would I just carry the registration for the one boat? Okay, so I think got that.
Yeah, and I don't think I captured that in this slide either.
Okay.
We're touching the wave tops early, but I expect some of these finer details will come out in our subsequent rollouts and our education. So that's a great question. You take a picture of your registration, and the wardens can check that too, right? They punch in a number and they know. So that's very easy.
So if I buy a hunting license, but I'm using one of these access areas, as long as I have verification of my hunting license, I'm good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Representative Norris.
The license is just to use one of these public access areas. I mean, if I own a place on the water, I can launch my own kayak into the water and I can paddle all over the lake.
Right.
Yep. No license needed.
Just to use one of our access areas that's paid for by these traditional funds. Great question. Yeah, the public body of water is still free. Yeah, the parking will
I'm
be
not gonna start
different.
taxing the air that I breathe anytime soon.
No, sir.
Just making
No plans. Nope. Next slide, please, Abigail. So implementation is ideally next spring, and if you can believe it, we have to get our Fish and Wildlife Law Digest ready almost before the summer hits, so we can start making edits and tweaks. So having these meetings are wonderful to gauge support and otherwise. So we're looking to implement this next spring, probably by Memorial Day. So a year from May, we'd like this to be rolled out when the boating season begins. We'll require 6 months of intensive outreach and education with partner organizations and the public. And then we put a year here. That's traditionally been our rollout period for new actions that might require an enforcement. But in reality, it's longer than 2 years for this kind of thing. I think it took us 6 or 7 years to write the first lead sinker ticket. And I think when historically things have been one way, we take a long time to enforcement wise to roll out a heavy hand. And don't mean to belabor that, but I just want to put everyone's mind at ease. And this would be similar to a hunting or fishing license. So we're thinking, I've said anywhere between $15 and $20. Andrea, I think Andrea's leaning toward 20, so we may end up at 20. Next slide, please. So these will be, again, fishing access areas. You'll need some sort of license or registered motorboat. As I said in the onset, shooting ranges will continue to require a hunting or fishing or trapping license. And just pointing out some of the lands that we own won't be required for conservation camp access, fish culture stations where we do public tours, or stream bank management areas, which are essentially our lands that are adjacent to some riparian areas that folks can use for parking and fishing access. Will not be required there. Not always properly signed, so I think that's why we drew away from that too. Next slide, please, Abigail. So the commissioner of the day has authority to promulgate this rule. It will still have to go through one of the legislative committees. I believe it's ICAR. It could be wrong, but it will go through one of those committees. I say that because it doesn't necessarily involve committee jurisdiction. I certainly want to make sure you all have a hand in blessing it or otherwise, but we will be able to handle this through commissioner and secretary's signature and some public outreach, and then through ICAR. We'll roll it out through our point of sale system, where you would buy your normal license, and again through QR codes at access areas. I think just for conversation's sake, the first 2 years, we anticipate a lot of education. Once we can get people using these QR codes, we'll be able to remind them on an annual basis that these are coming due, and hopefully we'll be able to roll this out in conjunction with a 365-day effort. So if you bought it today, it would be good till yesterday next year. And again, compliance through the warden service. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So undoubtedly you have some questions. I've heard from a lot of users that are adamant that this is a fee at a time when fees are not kosher and not being pushed by the administration. We are looking at this as another license, and I'm sure they're synonymous in some people's minds, but this is an access opportunity for people to pay in and help a system. I know that sounds like a political answer, but not a fee. It is a license, and it will be. I believe the studies we've done with the 14 states that we've done, including Maryland, Montana, Delaware, to name some of the high and low points in the country. Virginia was a place we studied because they had a very troubled rollout and then turned it around. Montana's had a lot of success. We've studied a lot of other places, and we're confident that this will be worth the squeeze within a couple of years. I had the numbers with wildlife management areas rolled in to tell you how much we were going to make, but wildlife management areas have been pulled out, so I don't have those numbers on how much we expect to draw in with just access areas at the moment, but I can certainly get you that number. It's knowable.
Respect to the boat registration, me if I'm out paddling around on kayak or something, would one registration cover everybody on the boat?
Great question.
How would that work?
We've had this very discussion. That boat itself with everyone on it will be covered. It was not initially the proposal. It is now the proposal to have the entire boat be encompassed, to encompass all users on it.
Okay.
Great question.
Representative Chapin.
Like 8 questions, but I'll try and only ask 1 or 2 right now and then
Problem.
see where we go.
Sure.
So the place I most frequent and use is a pond that has this kind of access with some parking. and then has just down the road a trail with some spots that people use for swimming, and has, you know, I don't know, at least 20 private properties around it. And, you know, we go there all the time. I see people go there who won't go to a state park because it's a free access for swimming and boating. And we just heard from the State Parks Forever, talking about the work they've been doing over the past few years to try and actually increase equity access to our state park system, because there's always been fees that are not large. They're, you know, so not fairly similar to the kinds of costs you're talking about here. But we've just heard about how incredibly valuable it's been to sort of make free way for lower income Vermonters to access state parks, and how much more access is happening now. And so I think of these, you know, and I know it's not the point of these access areas, nor the parking, nor is the parking substantial enough for all of these. So in the moment, from my experience, I'm thinking about this almost as like a parking fee, and that the parking areas might be the biggest infrastructure that your department manages that's getting used by many other kinds of users. So for example, you know, at Curtis Pond, I can park in the fishing access area and launch my canoe, or I can park at the swimming trail and carry my canoe, you know, longer than my parents could carry their canoe, but I can carry my canoe. You know, so just wondering about, really, I'm wondering about equity. And like, I see the importance of sort of acknowledging who's using our resources, and that the state needs to manage these resources, and they become more expensive. And then if we have, and what I witness is some of these parking areas are not sufficient for the increased types of use. You know, and somebody's pulling out their fishing boat and somebody else is trying to get out their kayak, and, you know, there's like navigating the same boat ramp. So some of those dynamics that I think are really important for your team to be thinking about and figuring out. And so I really acknowledge the infrastructure stuff, but I'm just thinking about many of the places where I see where I could walk through the woods and get in the water 5 feet away from the access. So I'm just wondering if really what we're talking about is like a parking day use fee, and really the, like, and so you're saying, you know, per boat, you only need one license. And I'm thinking maybe really what we're talking about is more akin to per car fee for parking access. So it's just from my experience, I'm just sort of curious about that. I'm also, and related to that, the use of the word license here is curious to me for some of the same reasons. And when I think of licenses, particularly within your department, I think of things that we try and manage the numbers of. And sometimes anybody who wants a license has access to a license. Sometimes there's a pool and so many licenses that are issued. So I find the use of the word license in relationship to the types of uses you're using curious. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to that. And so, yeah, there's a lot embedded in this, but on the equity side, I know there's environmental justice laws. And I'm wondering if in the rulemaking, you would have to go through some kind of equity lens to look at that. Do you know? So that was like 5 questions rolled in.
No, I'm happy to wrap all that into a thought. I think we certainly, our first foot forward is always equity and accessibility. I find using Curtis Pond as an example, Curtis Pond experiences conflicted uses on a daily basis, especially in the warm days in the summer. I think if a warden is not driving by, or they're on their way most days because of the complaints that they receive because of the overcrowding of that access area, I don't see this license of being a solution for that, because Curtis Pond is such a unique spot, right? Without buying the land across the road and adding more capacity, I don't see that as solving it. I do believe, and I could be wrong here, someone may be listening that can correct me, but most of our priority uses come down to parking capacity. So I think you're on to the point. Some of them are simply not a factor when we get down to like a Mallett's Bay, Lake Seymour. It's hard to fill those up, but there are places where because of use and capacity, we are we are bumping up against budget and bumping up against capacity to maintain these access areas with the kiosks, the grading, the plowing, the sanding, the mowing, the trash pickup. I don't know how to reconcile the traditional uses. I know that people were using Curtis Pond access area before there was a Fish and Wildlife Department, right? And so to insert ourselves now is going to be uncomfortable for some people. I completely understand, and I'm happy to visit that conversation. I do feel that this will be a point in time to move forward and bring some understanding to people of what they're getting when they have access to a lake or a pond. I think looking at the backside of Curtis Pond, it's very daunting to think about trying to go another place, right? There are some places where you could carry a canoe or a kayak to another place, but some of this would be paying for the convenience of being right on the water. And using the car analogy, if you got 10 people out at an access area to do most things, it wouldn't be lawful now to do that. If they all had a fishing pole, they'd all be great. But if they all got out of that car to go swimming or something at the access area, it wouldn't be an approved use now. So that's a clarification that some people don't consider. Swimming is not an allowed use at an access area. We've never allowed it. We try not to be too heavy-handed with it, but it's not an approved use now. But if it were a car pass, we've been steered away very strongly from car passes and from boat passes because they're not transferable and they have to be renewed every year, and ordinance have to check the date on them. So we've been encouraged to go the phone route. But 10 people in a boat is easy. 10 people getting out of a Suburban to go do something that it may not be approved is a challenge. And I'd love some clarification on the use of the word license, because we have a couple different terms. We use permit for an antlerless allowance, right? A landowner or a person can apply for an antlerless permit or a moose permit. But I guess that's where my understanding of the question might end. I would love to call it something else. We've batted around names for it for a long time, but we feel it's most appropriate because of the mission of law enforcement that's tied to it. What I've been saying is, and it may sound cheesy and it may sound not appropriate, but I do feel that there are people, because we have studied a few groups like bird watchers who feel as though they would like to pay. They know what they're getting from a bird watching experience. They know that we manage wildlife species. They don't have a way to pay into this fish and wildlife system unless they hunt or fish or trap. And so using it as a license has a positive connotation to me on that side of it. But I completely, well, I don't completely understand, but I would love to have the conversation further on a better name. Of course.
Representative Pritchett, then I will go.
Thanks, Commissioner. Dingle Johnson was 1950. And if anybody asks you about Pittman Robertson, that's 1937. 37. Yeah. So for me, this sets, I guess it sets an alarm off for me, and not so much of the program. I have felt for years that the Fish and Wildlife Department of Vermont perennially has been underfunded. And when this comes up, that just makes that clear to me that that's a problem. And it could create other problems, as Representative Chapin said, equity problems and so on and so forth. When we were going through the budget process today and it was being laid out, I just looked at a couple of things. And, the three examples they gave us were the amount of employees at DEC, FPR, and Fish and Wildlife. And if you break down the amount of employees by the budget they have, it's eye-opening. Fish and Wildlife is getting the job done based on the overall budget for $132,000. FPR is twice as much. DEC is 4 times as much.
which tells me, you know, I just don't think we're funding this department the way we should for the responsibilities they have and the things that we ask them. You know, you're responsible for all the wildlife in Vermont, for everybody to enjoy, all the flora and fauna. And the list goes on and on. You know, we gave you an FTE last year, but we really didn't give you an FTE. We gave you a lot of extra work and gave you a person that I don't even know if one FTE is enough for 180. So, you know, I would like us to really look at your department. And I think it gets overlooked. And I think that the things that the folks do there is really underappreciated. So when I see something like this, I just say, you know what? We ought to take a pause and say, why is this necessary? You know, to take care of the department. So, you know, that's the way I feel about it. That's my feelings on it.
It's very kind of you to say, and staying in my current lane, I know if you looked at the budget, you would see much smaller numbers than we stand to gain in this effort. And I think I'd go back to what I said about, maybe we come back and look at this 10 years from now, and we are, flourishing with all the money in the world. I still think we would be happy that we had this $200,000 that we're going to make off of this license. And I understand the equity piece, and I meant to elaborate a little bit more on Representative Chapin's questions. We do plan to have a very long list of exemptions to this license. And we haven't had time to reach all partners yet, but we do have, there are many exemptions to our license system now. We did the numbers the other day. We give a tremendous amount of well-deserved free licenses, and this would certainly fall in many categories for persons of need or qualification. But I think, and I appreciate everything that you said. But I do think no matter how small the amount and no matter how far away we get from debt, just call it, I think we would still be glad we had this fee. And I'm just one person. I could be very wrong about that. But thank you for the kind words. Sir.
This last weekend, Seymour Lake was covered with trucks, trailers, and snow machines, none of which were fishing. So you may want to consider some sort of patent, whatever you want to call it, for alternative uses for the parking lots, because the swimming access parking lot full, boat launch parking lot full, and that's a large lot. It takes a lot of vehicles to fill it up. Just saying, I don't particularly like the word license, because in those cases, they're not fishing, not trapping. So you may want to go to Webster's and look for an alternative word to see what would cover that. Because that's not the only thing. It was put out by Snowcross.
I was wondering if it was the snowmobile event.
Yeah, it was. There should be, I'm not home to look at the newspaper, but I'm sure there's going to be adequate amounts of coverage that hasn't already occurred. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Representative Daigle, then Representative Austin.
To follow on what Representative Pritchard was talking about, looking at other agencies within A&R. Since Fish and Wildlife is managing wildlife, is there a way to, I don't know, I'm just wondering out loud, for DEC to be able to supplement the budget of Fish and Wildlife Service? Just wondering out loud.
I'd love to pull the secretary in and have that conversation. I would have to wait for her on that. And I don't I don't truly know how much, I mean, there, to answer some of your question too, much of their money is passed through from the federal government, right? Their budget does look huge, but they're supporting a lot of municipal efforts at the same time, that money that they never see. But great question.
So if you go to like Sandbar or Button Bay, or Kneecap Bay, and you pay an entry fee to a park, do you still have to pay this?
So our lands are disassociated from one another. So I've used this example in the past. If I go to Elmore State Park and bring my family, I pay at the gate. And it is essentially you're paying to park. If I go and park at the church, I can walk across and go swimming at the beach for free, right? And same with Green River, I can park at the Green River access and go to the gate. These are just areas near me. But if I go up the road and walk through the woods, I'm free. And so the answer is no. So if you went through to Button Bay or Niket, I think Niket State Park, yeah, you would be a singular point of pay that you wouldn't have to worry about this. This would just be Fish and Wildlife lands.
Any other further questions? Alan, Caitlin?
You mentioned at the very beginning that maybe there's like decades of work leading up to this. I guess, and because I'm particularly interested in the years leading up to this, sort of what other things you've been looking at as options to address this. Because I feel like maybe you're both and maybe you can clarify. I feel like you're both addressing a budget issue and like costs increasing and license in certain kinds of income going down. And you're trying to address the fact that the outdoor recreation reality in this day and age has changed. And the use of these particular, right now, we're just talking about fishing accesses on public waters have changed. And so instead of being like, you all who are not hunting and fishing shouldn't be using these accesses, you're trying to actually be inclusive here and say, public's use has shifted and we do want this to be accessible. If you have a boat, maybe that's, I'm still trying to say, like, trying to understand the list of approved things, because I take my paddleboard, I don't have a paddleboard. If I take my friend's paddleboard and put it on top of my car and drive to Curtis and park in the fishing access and paddle out, I can go swimming, but I'm just not supposed to swim from the ramp, basically, like, don't get in the way of the boats. Anyway, so I see you both, I think I see you both trying to address a financial issue and who's really using these spaces and what's the public need and trends in public outdoor recreation right now. So I'm curious about the lead up to this choice and other things that you considered, and maybe you don't have time to really fully answer that now, but
There's quite a bit of it, and I appreciate that positive spin. It's varied over the years, and I'm nearly certain it's been 30 years in the making to have the support from the administration and the right idea to do this. But it's varied from parking passes to vessel passes, stickers each year, well, I'll stop there. Those are the two that I know that have been studied. Commissioner Porter and Commissioner Barry both took swings at this and spoke to me about their experiences. I couldn't recall them, but I know that there is quite a study at hand we could provide to you about the history of our effort. And again, the stars aligned this year with the governor and his ability to allow this for us, and the right ideas coming from all the states that we studied. It was Paul Hamlin, some of you may know, that really led this effort. He retired right before the session. We don't have access to him, but we have all his work.
there's something in writing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That looks at some of the other alternatives that have been considered. I'd love to see that.
Betcha.
Senator Pritchard?
You brought up the other states do it. You mentioned Montana. Are you referring to like BLM and BMA lands? Or what kind of program does Montana have?
So it's Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Montana FWP. So right now you can go camp at one of their access areas. You just have to pay while you do it. That is their example of allowing different uses, and camping wouldn't still be allowed at our access areas. That's just one of the things that they allow. But that's the extent of my knowledge about the Montana program. They allow people to use their access areas for other purposes, but these are state. There may be some federal tie-in to them that I'm not aware of. This is coming from a little bit of personal experience and a little bit of the study. But Montana has gone to a model similar to this that we did cover in our study language. That's the extent of my knowledge about it.
I was just wondering, I mean, the BLM and BMA programs out there are great. They're great for the folks that live there. It gives the ability, and it's different geographically, it would be different for Vermont because you don't have the, you don't have the, I don't think you would have the access or the amount of land that Montana has, but I know, for example, on block management out there, there's little sign-in boxes at each ranchers participate in it and say they have a 20,000 acre ranch. They may put 10,000 of it in BLM land. You sign in, you get a permission slip to hunt or whatever. At the end of the day, you put it in and the state of Montana reimburses those landowners for allowing access, to their land. So, I think that would be a hard thing to try to do with our geographics. I was just curious as if that was a program you were referring to, but it's an entirely separate program.
It sounds like it is.
Members, we're running over, so we've got to close the session. I want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much for
The information.
Thank you.
Thank
We're
you so
happy to
much.
be here so much. I will see you again soon, no doubt. Have fun on the floor.
You charge to get into the state parks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yes, I love
That's
fun.
worth talking about and thinking about more, like, for years of thinking about it. It's a long time.
It is. Yeah, Paul just retired with 30-something years. I think it was him that says this is one of his ideas, right? That's a big one to go see what I can provide for Paul. I don't know if the study goes back there.
Members, we're still live.
I mean, better not be talking.
Thank you. In the hot seat.
Thank you, colleagues on the Environment Committee for giving me the opportunity just to very, very quickly, and I realize we don't have a whole lot of time, so we'll get ahead to the floor, to present Bill H 805.
Even if you're in the hot seat.
Even if I am in the hot seat, I still need to introduce myself. My name is Representative Rob North from Ferrisburg, serving the greater Virgins area, Ferrisburg, Virgins, Panton, Addison, Waltham, and a third of New Haven. And I'm here to talk about H 805, a bill that I authored and co-sponsored along with a neighboring representative from a neighboring district, Herb Olson. The ideas presented in this bill came from constituents, all of them. And I really liked them, so I thought, well, I'm gonna try to codify that and see if I can get them to go through. And some of the constituents were actually in Herb's district, so that's why Herb and I co-sponsored this. A couple of those constituents were water systems engineers. That's where a lot of these ideas came from. Some of them are fellow commissioners in the Act 250 program, fellow Act 250 commissioners. And some are just constituents worried about the implementation of Act 181. So let me just go through an overview and then I'll walk through the bill if you can, and when it comes time to walk through it, you can pull up H 805 on your screens if you'd like. So there's only four basic things that this bill does. It's kind of a collection of these four things. The first is that it asks the Agency of Natural Resources to treat the engineering approval and design and permitting of wetlands and stormwater activity the same way that it currently does wastewater activity. And you'll see the wording in the bill, but basically wastewater gives deference to is the language and the wording, but it's run as a kind of outsourced, where the agency certifies engineers to do the work. And when those engineers do their engineering work and design work, the agency really just takes that work, sees that they've followed the rules and stamps it off. There's no additional engineering work within the agency. And so this bill asks the stormwater program and the wetlands program to do that same kind of thing, set up certified engineers to do the work. It also, and this is another idea that came from the stormwater engineers, so the water system engineers, was to allow owners of residences to waive their or reduce some of the standards on their own property relative to some of the engineered water related solutions, to allow either alternative engineering solutions to be beyond what's currently identified in the standards, or they themselves take on liability that gets recorded as part of their deed for maybe putting their own well water system and septic system too close to each other and violating some boundaries. Or I'm just using that as an example. But in other words, giving the engineer a little more flexibility in coming up with, and even giving the owner of the house of the property a little more flexibility in taking on the liability themselves. That was the second thing. Third thing is really starts to address taxation by valuing the property in accordance with what we currently use as a use value appraisal or current use valuation for a property, if and for whatever segment of your property is identified as wetlands or identified as tier 3. If your property that you have owned and paid taxes on for a long time suddenly gets classified as part of a wetland or part of tier 3, then you shouldn't have to pay the full rate of taxes for that portion of property that is classified in those sections, in those designations. So that's the third thing. Fourth thing is a tiny little thing. Again, this came from several of my fellow Act 250 district commissioners, that when we do an on-site visit of a parcel that is going through Act 250 permitting, it's oftentimes convenient to go and do an on-site visit. And when we do that, that should be exempt from the online meeting law. We shouldn't have to go there, do the visit, talk about it, and specifically for the purpose, and I want to, it's narrowed down specifically for the purpose of doing what the commissioners all do offline. It's not an online thing, is make the decision between a major and a minor permit requirement. That's really the entire responsibility of commissioners, is to decide if a particular permitting is major or minor. If it's major, it has to go through the whole public hearing thing. If we decide it's minor, then it can go through without public hearing. But that just doing that visit so we can see the property itself shouldn't have to be an online meeting. And there's confusion the way the rules are written right now as to whether that requires us to then go back, have another session to talk about what we saw and do that all online. Even though we currently make our decisions completely offline, we just email each other what the decision, just kind of back and forth email. Yeah, I think it's minor. Yeah, I think it's minor. Okay, we'll go for it. So that's all offline. So why would, if we all go to a site to look at it to help us make that determination, why would that have to be online? So those are the 4 things that it does. And I can walk you through the specific wording. If you look on page 2 at line 12 is the key bit, and you can see the underlined text there that's added. And this is the key verbiage, where line 12, it says, the sentence that says, the secretary shall give deference to a certification by a licensed engineer. That's the key phrase that currently appears already relative to wastewater, and it's being added here in the section under this, it is section 913 and 10 VSA 913, it's specifically to wetlands. Right. So that whole paragraph, according to Michael O'Grader, our ledge counsel, was required, but that's the key phrase, shall give deference to a certification by a licensed engineer. That's the key phrase. And so what that does is allows the agency to set up a certified list of engineers, identify the certification process, certify engineers to do this work, third-party engineers that they come with, and then they just approve what the engineer did. Same kind of thing then appears on page 3 toward the very bottom. In fact, it's the last line, line 21 on page 3. And this is in 10 VSA section 1264 relative to storm water. And again, Secretary, where the risk of harm from stormwater runoff is low, the Secretary shall give deference to a certification by a licensed engineer. So that's the key phrase. That allows licensed engineers to take on this task as opposed to retaining it all within A&R. Let's see. That kind of language already exists, as I said, in the wastewater arena, well, which is included, I think, in the bill just for reference. So you can see on page 5, line 16, section F1. This is all in the wastewater section. You can see the language already exists there. The Secretary shall give deference to a certification by a licensed engineer. See, that already exists relative to wastewater. However, moving on within the wastewater section, on page 6 now. And this is something, I guess I didn't present this in the overview at the beginning. This is something that was very specifically asked for by the wastewater engineers because of the lack of consistency that they see as these wastewater engineers who are already certified by the state. The wastewater already has this certification in place for the engineers to do the work. But when they go to one of the district, when they submit their plans in one of the districts of the state, everything goes through just fine. If they're working in another district of the state, they get raked over the coals. All of their design work gets redone, and so they really struggle. So a lot of them just refuse to even bid on jobs in certain areas of the state because they know that the person doing the oversight there gives them such a hard time. So what they've asked for is really on page 6, starting at line 4. This is subsection 3 there, where it says of this section do not require department review, and the activity will pose only a minor risk or harm to health of the human environment. And then item 4, this is specifically asked for by the engineers. Secretary shall issue a permit under this chapter for a potable water supply or wastewater system serving, and then here's the specifics that say whenever it's below this threshold, all you do is just a department administrative review. Serving a residential flow, so it's a residence, not commercial, residential flow of 1,000 gallons per day or less. And then after reviewing the design related information submitted by the licensed engineer, only administrative compliance with the requirements of the chapter. So that kind of defines that bar. If the design engineer is working on something in a small residential setting, then the secretary, the overseer has only reviews for administrative compliance. In other words, they check all the boxes, they sign the bottom, they're not redoing any of the engineering. So that just makes very clear what the bar is. Whereas currently that's in flux. There's no clear definition of that. And so it leads to a lot of inconsistency across the state, and the water system engineers are doing their job. And lastly, let's see, on page 9 is the section that Secretary shall by rule at the very top of the page identify technical standards for an owner of an occupied residences, and it's their place. They allow some of these standards to be waived or reduced if they can, A, an alternative engineered solution, or B, they assume all the liability for damages incurred. again, this is currently being done in New Hampshire, that this whole section was modeled after exactly how it's done in New Hampshire. So, again, the water system engineers I was, working with, or pointing to New Hampshire, said we should be able to do the same thing. And very lastly, the little tiny change at the bottom of, oh, I'm sorry, no, this is not very lastly. At the bottom of, page 9, portion or parcel of land owned by a resident of the state that is wetlands or tier 3 land shall be valued at the lesser of the fair market value, or the value of a forested land is determined by the current use advisory board. In other words, the use value appraisal of the land. But notice that on line, page 9 at the very bottom, line 18, this only applies to Vermonters. So if an out-of-state or somebody who is not a Vermont resident owns land, they don't get these nice tax breaks, all right? This is the intent is to support Vermonters owning land. So the portion of parcel of land owned by a resident of the state that is wetlands shall be valued at those. Okay. All right, then lastly, go all the way to the very bottom, page 11. One added sentence, site visits by district commission or its members as part of permitting process under 10 VSA chapter 151. That's what the district commissioners do, are not subject to the requirements of this chapter being the online meeting requirements chapter. So there you have it.
Question, Rob.
Yes.
Didn't see in here, septic, especially if it's a mound system, any provisions for the shadow, say on sloped.
Yeah, those standards already exist. And the design engineers have to work to those standards. I think the section you're referring to is if they want to violate those standards, that this section gives the engineer the opportunity to, well, yeah, normally in this grade, that would be considered too close, but if I build I don't know, some intermediate, a wall or some channel to, yeah, I don't know what the possible design differences would be, but you know, they could violate those standards if they do some alternate engineered solution, or they say, well, I can't, you don't have enough space on your land. If you want me to do this, you know, you're gonna have to take all the liability, Mr. Landowner. And this gives the landowner to take that, assume that liability.
Representative Boston.
So that, like in Colchester, there were failed septic systems
Yeah.
all along East Lake Shore Drive because the soil there. And so we're putting now a septic system in, but the liability there is Alex Bay was getting filled.
Yeah,
So how does the landowner?
if it's gonna affect somebody else, yeah, then they become responsible for like the infection of the entire Mallett's Bay, yeah, so, yeah, right, that's probably not such a good idea.
For their neighbor's ground.
Yeah, I have to admit, of all of those ideas, that's the one I liked the least out of all of these.
Mhm.
That assuming the liability, I was okay, yeah, fine, if they can find an alternative engineered solution, that makes sense to me, but assuming the liability, and then like, what about when they sell the property, want to collect the exo, So I have to admit, personally, I didn't like that one so much, but that was what my constituent was looking for, so I put it on. But if we decide to take this up, I'm happy with editing that out.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Yeah, and